Leading crowdsourcing practitioners share their tales, trials, and triumphs. This is Loud About Crowdsourcing.
Hello, welcome to episode 2 of Loud About Crowdsourcing. I'm one of your hosts, Will Price. This week, myself, Nick, and Clinton sit down with John Winsor, the founder of Victor and Spoils and the Speakeasy Guild. We have a great conversation.
We are joined right now by John Winsor,
co-creation,
founder of
crowdsourcing,
Victor and Spoils, and also currently
so without any further
the
ado,
CEO
let's
and founder
get over to
of
the
the
interview.
Speakeasy Guild. John, thanks for joining us. We're thrilled to have you here, so thank you so much for joining us. So let's get right into it. I mean, we're here to talk about open innovation and crowdsourcing today. And the first question that I plan on asking every guest who comes on our show is, what is your crowdsourcing story? For all of us, it's like a cult in a lot of ways. You have that one time, that one moment where it clicks for you and you go, oh, this is the future. And you clearly must have had that moment since you founded a company that was a key part of the model. So can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think my story goes way back, probably to in like the early '90s. And actually late 90s probably. So I owned a magazine called Women's Sports and Fitness, and it was a magazine. We had like 250,000 subscribers, but we always had a problem, beating out Self and Shape, which are our two biggest competitors, because they had, probably 5 times the circulation that we had. And so, one of the things we found in our research was this thing that, our readers influenced 12 other people. So we kind of created this narrative that said that, Self and Shape, their readers were probably, the people that came to a yoga class, our readers were the yoga instructors. And so that worked really well and created a lot of momentum. That was actually in the early 90s. And then when I sold the magazine in 2000 to Condé Nast, I was super intrigued by the idea that, we were using, our readers of Women's Sports and Fitness were kind of a media target, but it felt like the marketing funnel, we would get, pennies of the dollar of what the brands were spending on marketing, and yet these were the most influential people. We did one research project when we were at Women's Sports and Fitness we were trying to launch a magazine to high school girl athletes, and so we flipped the paradigm. We said, well, why not, instead of trying to help brands reach those women, why not take these influencers and put them at the top of the funnel and then do this thing? I came up with this idea in 2002 of co-creating brand products or products and marketing ideas with kind of influential consumers. It was all based on kind of Everett Rogers' Diffusions of Innovation work that he did in the 50s. Kind of pre-tipping point, certainly way before any social media stuff was out. So that kind of launched a company. After I sold to Condé Nast, I launched a company called Radar Communications that focused on that kind of emergent model of taking influencers and doing research and strategy and having them co-create mostly products with brands. Wrote 4 books. So wrote Beyond the Brand. I tried to call the book Beyond the Brand in 2003, call the book Co-Create, but the publisher said, oh, co-creation's dumb, it'll never happen, call it Beyond the Brand. It was their choice. So unfortunate, but that's the way it works. And then I wrote Spark and Flipped later on the same thing, how to co-create with your customers. So that was pretty influential point. And then sold that company to Condé Nast. Sold that company to Crispin Porter Bogusky, and we did a crowdsourcing project at Crispin with CrowdSpring, and it really blew things up because we were the creative agencies of the decade, and the idea of the creative agency of the decade crowdsourcing their creative was very controversial.
John, you took us through your journey getting to the founding of Victors and Spoils. Can you tell us a little more about the inspiration behind that venture in particular?
The last 15 years really come a long way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, and I think that so what's been super interesting is like, thinking about the co-creation idea, because crowdsourcing wasn't even an idea then. And then I helped Jeff Howe, when he was working on the book, the crowdsourcing book. And then, and then open innovation as an idea came along. What we were interested in is more, how do we, at Victors and Spoils, the first thing we wanted to do is we really felt like there are all these people out there that wanted to create customers in the context of co-creation, but also, lots of freelancers that could do good work that weren't, in an agency. And kind of based on the, Bill Joy quote that everybody loves to use, that, the best employees work somewhere else. So, our philosophy was, let's just have an open system. We kind of knew that, to really move the whole open dialogue forward, that if we could kind of use this tension, so create an ad agency based on crowdsourcing principles, it's kind of like adding oil to water. And, it's really more of a marketing play. Our point of view compared to, like, say, you guys, Topcoder or Tongle or 99 Designs at the time in 2009 was, we felt like, platforms in the long run will win, but we need some kind of transitional hybrid model to kind of get people to pay attention. So they kind of build a bridge to the future. And so that was the idea that, hey, we have all the agency activities. You can find a strategy director and a creative director and account management, but yet underneath that, it was the democratization of creativity. The crazy thing is that we launched, and Stuart Elliott from the New York Times was kind enough to write a half-page article about us. 700 people joined our crowd that night, and Dish Network gave us, $4 million worth of his whole TV budget to do that night. So, but the next morning we were in business in a pretty big way. So, but it definitely was interesting because it caused an incredible amount of tension in the industry, right? It just pissed everybody off, and there was all the arguments of, some hack in Cyprus is going to do my job as an agency guy in the halls of JWT or something like that. So that's kind of where we started, and we really wanted to build a bridge to the future, and certainly didn't mind having a few arrows in our back to start with, and we got a lot of those, and we were probably too early, but it was a great ride, and certainly was fun to be at the kind of forming moments of the industry.
Hey, John, I have a question real quickly. So at Topcoder, we still see culture, and it plays such a gigantic role in whether, a crowdsourcing initiative, whether it takes off and if it becomes something that amplifies and really helps teams at scale. So are there any telltale signs that when you start working with a team that you can, point to whether a team is really ready to embrace crowdsourcing and open innovation or perhaps not?
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. I would say, my experience, because I would say the biggest experience we had is when we sold majority of VNS to Havas. One of the ideas was to create this thing called Havas Crowd and use crowdsourcing principles for the 20,000 internal employees inside Havas. Everybody loved the idea. The creatives loved the idea. Strategists loved the idea. If you're some creative kid in Shanghai, the idea to launch into a big Peugeot brief out of Paris is such an amazing opportunity. But what killed it was like the 400 CEOs across the 400 agencies, so inside the mid-level managers inside Havas. And the basic question they had is like, hey, if one of my employees works on this project, then how am I personally going to be compensated? Even though, they might work off hours, even though it's for the greater good of the company, they wanted to know how they were personally compensated. And if they weren't personally compensated, they were going to torpedo the project. So I think that's the biggest learning I've had. And I think it played out, on some of the work, Clinton, that you guys and I did with Local Motors and Forth on Airbus. I think when, Tom Enders did that first project and he wanted to crowdsource, the design of drones, it was such a brilliant idea. And I think one of the things that probably he wished he hadn't done was that he sent out a memo to everybody inside Airbus, saying, hey, if you're an engineer at Airbus, you can't participate in this contest. The problem was it became an us versus them prospect, and I think that project had $500,000 of the prize money, $100,000 going to the top, the top designer. And if you think about it logically, you've got somebody who's working in Munich as an engineer, for the last 10 years in Airbus, maybe makes 150 grand, and then some kid does a drone design on the Airbus platform and in 30 days wins 100 grand. It just seems like such a threat to the organization. So I think that's the thing, right? Is like part of integrating and growing this industry is how do we like build these bridges, build these tools that makes bigger companies understand that it's not, it's not an us versus them thing. It's kind of it can be an additive program. Clinton, you and I have talked about it. I think what Deloitte Pixel's doing is a really good, point in that direction. Kind of this strategic layer between the platforms and the actual end client. So that it's not as scary, right? That the strategic platform, or in this case, Deloitte Pixel, kind of talks the corporate language, frames things up in the corporate way. It's just that they use a platform to execute the work, and then they bring that work back together. And so it feels very consultative, very Deloitte-like, and they can sell it up the chain, right? So I think that's the biggest issue, is just the incentives and how do you frame it up.
Yeah, I think that's a great point right there, John. So I think it's super important to just hammer home the idea that it is not this us versus them mentality, and that could just be so cancerous. And instead, if it is this us with them, it can be that amplification we were talking about earlier. I just think it's something we have to be, if any team is embracing crowdsourcing or open initiative, you have to be on like a consistent lookout to see is that kind of mentality starting to creep in within your organization.
Yeah, no, and I think it even goes beyond that too, right? I think there's I think it's critical to have kind of this transition, because every company that I talk to these days is like, oh my God, what's our Uber or what's our Airbnb in our market that's going to totally destroy us? Like, what are the sharing economy principles that certainly crowdsourcing is a part of that are going to destroy us? And so it's like, can you help a brand build their kind of Airbnb or their own Uber, their own sharing tool that allows them to kind of experiment in this area. So, and that's a big thing, for me. I also think what's interesting, and that my sense is it's much bigger than what we just talked about. I mean, there was a really great article today in Adweek. And I think there's an article, in this magazine called Rico, and it's talking about the rise of the influencers in marketing, right? So what I find so interesting about that is, like, it used to be, even if you think about crowdsourcing and where the crowdsourcing tool is applied, well, for Topcoder, it's all about coding and building apps, right? And in marketing, it's all been about creating video, as in Tongle, or creating research, as in Wonder, or creating design ideas, as in 99 Design. It was part of the workflow. What I find super interesting about the influencer market, right, and I would call that kind of very classic crowdsourcing. So the article this week today in Adweek, or yesterday, was an article about this program that Axe just did. So Axe got 30 influencers. All influencers have over 1 million people on Instagram. All those 30 influencers created their own ads. So not only were they the stars, but they were the producers and the content creators. They also the media company. So I looked at one of the videos this morning, and one kid had 1.4 million views on Instagram in 5 days. Contrast that to that new show, I think it's called, what is it? This Is Us, the really popular NBC show. That if you review all the shows, the big hits this season, 2017, the biggest shows are getting 2.2 million people to watch them, and between ages, for the group between ages 18 to 49. So you've got a program that's costs millions of dollars to produce. You've got an agency that's spending millions of dollars to create content for that 30-second spot. You've got a production company doing it. So, that's all this really interesting creative work to hit a consumer, 2.2 million consumers. And then you've got one kid with, 4 million followers on Instagram that essentially creates his own content for a brand like Axe in a day and launches it. It's incredibly disruptive. And so that's why I think sometimes when we think about, crowdsourcing, we're kind of, in a sense, we're kind of becoming our own bureaucracy. We're not thinking big enough, right? Like we're trying to kind of atomize things and say, oh, well, crowdsourcing or open in the speakeasy sense is we can aggregate teams of creatives or strategists to solve these problems. Whereas influencers are saying, hey, we'll write a strategic brief, give it to 30
going
people.
Going back to
not only will they
what you
come
were
up
talking
with
about
the
with what you
ideas,
do at
produce
Speakeasy,
the ideas,
I think
they'll also produce the
very
media
clearly
and launch it
established
to the
that there's
world.
going to be a lot of value in curation and
disruptive.
aggregation of all of the different avenues that you can access crowds, whether that's through influencers or crowds, communities that exist on Topcoder and other crowdsourcing websites.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're doing with Speakeasy right now to further that curation and aggregation goal?
Yeah, so there's a couple areas that we're playing at. One is, so I would say, the big goal, the overarching goal of my work is, after being in the industry for so long, I'm really intrigued personally with how do we grow, high tide floats all boats. So I've been out talking a lot to platforms and talking a lot to brands. Like if we look at, the open systems or open innovation or crowdsourcing as a classic platform, you've got the supply side, which is VNS and Topcoder and Tongle and all the platforms and companies that serve the open market. And then you've got the demand side, which are agencies and brands and people trying to get work done. And so for the supply side, I'm really interested is like, what's the go-to-market strategy? How do we share that? How do we get better at that as a group, right? To be able to make it easier to sell in to the demand side. And for the demand side is like, how do we take advantage of these new tools to make us go, better, faster, cheaper, easier to do work, all those things. And so at the highest level, that's what we're trying to do. And so one of the things we're playing with Speakeasy Guild itself is the idea of matching talent. So we believe that whereas, a lot of platforms, so, I think you talked a lot about the idea of curation. That to me is the key, right? So if you look about it in kind of the Sangeet Chandra platform revolution context, he kind of lays out a bunch of ways to curate. And one way is you can, use kind of crowd to curate things. You can use algorithms to curate things. You can use editors to curate things. So what we're seeing is, like when we started at VNS, we were really into bigger crowds because we thought that, lots of ideas will come in and we'll curate those ideas. Now we've kind of progressed because, at the time, people were really, really hard to find. Pre-social media, pre-LinkedIn. Now when people are super easy to find, we feel like the curation is really about the talent, right? So it's really gone from classic crowds, to more matching, right? And we feel like that's the spectrum that exists in open. So on the matching side of things, we're really talking about what's the best way to match the right talent with the right task and continue to atomize projects and find the very best talent to do that. So that's what we're really focused on. And we're focused on not just matching the best talent as in an individual, but also, interestingly, finding the best talent through other platforms. We're really intrigued by, can we say, oh, hey, brand, in this case, Tongle is the right platform to use. So we're playing around with that task to talent talent to task. So, on one side we've got the Speakeasy Guild, which is kind of more personal and smaller talent, organizations. But what we're finding a growing part of our business is to actually create for brands and for agencies these kind of open tool sets, right? So we'll identify, here are open platforms you can use for different things. We're working with a really great agency right now called Click out of Canada, which is the largest independent healthcare agency. And one of their goals is to how do they get better insights, how do they do better research, and how do they create better creativity for their clients using open tools. What we've done is identified a bunch of different platforms that will be really good for them to use and understand not just how they work, how they do use, or how they can be best used, what their reputation is, what they might cost, so they can aggregate them really quickly in their systems. But then also kind of a how-to manual, right? How do you build a Click sub-brand that allows them to go to market with an open tool set and sell them to their clients? Because I think that's the future, right? The future is if we're really going to overturn the old paradigm, we've got to convince those folks like Click, like other agencies that do work with a lot of clients, that we can start amplifying the open systems.
John, so I have a quick follow-up specifically about Speakeasy. So if someone's coming to your platform for the first time or the 100th time, who is the onus on to do the kind of the matchmaking? Is it, if is the customer in your world, are they coming to Speakeasy and do they have to filter through some rating systems, or are you doing some of that matchmaking in the back end to make that experience easier on them?
Yeah, I think that's the case, right? I mean, I think that you still need the curation. You still need that. Like people's jobs inside companies, like at least on the brand side, aren't about recruiting talent, right? They just don't have that. They still have a way of working that's really driven the way that traditional companies are built, whether it's, in your case, whether it's, development, or on our side, it's more, creative work. The agencies look the way they do because brands are set up the way they are. And so I think that, I've appreciated the people that can just kind of go in and say, I want to work with, Clint or Nick or Will, that's really great.
Smart people there, John. Smart people.
Right, smart people, right? But it's really hard to do, right? It's more like, I've got this, I got to get this report out by the end of the day. Can you please just help me find the very best person in the world, right? And relying on, kind of back to those curation methods. I mean, it could be AI that helps, right? It could be an algorithm that helps do that. But still, I think that we're in this cycle that we don't trust AI as much as, we could or should. It could be a help, but it would be way better to kind of call you, Clint, and say, hey, I got this problem. Who are the top 3 guys you guys think of? You could be using an algorithm, but they're going to pay a premium to know that I trust Clint and Clint trusts these guys. So ergo, I'm gonna use those guys.
Yeah, John. I think at the end of the day, I think most people just don't want to spend all that time searching or like going through some repository and looking at star ratings and trying to play matchmaker. I really think that that they just want it to be easy for them, and where they hit a system and then all of a sudden, voila, the results are starting to pour in for them.
Yeah, I totally. I mean, I think if you really look at it, right, it's like, if we really think about what a service brand is, an agency or consulting company, it's really in its base, it's really a matching service, right? So if the 4 of us were at Boeing and we were saying, and we were executives, we're like, in the analog world, right? 10 years ago, we say, okay, well, we need some business consulting. What should we do, right? And so what we think about is say, it's McKinsey or it's Bain or it's Accenture, it's Deloitte. The fact of the matter is, one of the things we learned at Havas when I was there is that when a client spends $1 with Havas, 75 to 80 cents of that dollar goes to the bureaucracy of matching, to the executives of Havas, to the buildings, to the infrastructure, to the bureaucracy, and only 20 to 25 cents actually goes to doing the work. And I think what you've seen in other industries that that's what Uber did, right? Uber essentially looked at an industry that had an 80% kind of fixed cost overhead, right? Because you think about the taxi business, you had to pay if the 4 of us went from Midtown to downtown in New York, and we got a cab, the cost would be, we have to pay for the $1 million of the medallion, and we'd have to pay for the owner's salary and the mechanic's salary and the storage area and the gas. and all these things. So 80 cents of the dollar would be not the driver's salary or the driving of the car, but it would be the overhead, right? And essentially Uber just came in and said, well, we feel like there's a new way to match people that's way more thin and open, way lighter. And so, we're going to find people who are going to go from midtown to downtown, and you four guys can hop in the car with them, and they make a little money, and you solve your problem, and a lot less friction. And so I think that's at the core of what all our open solutions are all about. It's really reducing the matching cost for clients, right? It's saying that, hey, I have $1 to spend on advertising. Do I give 80 cents to the bureaucracy so that these guys can fly around on private jets and have their huge salaries and have great dinners?
So John,
or do I give it,
we've talked a lot about
80%
co-creation
to the
and
person
innovation.
doing the work and get way more
what do you
work out
view
of it?
being the difference
that's,
between
to
the
me,
two?
the beauty
And I know
of
you've spoken a
all
lot
this
about
democratized work that we're
bottom
all
up
talking
versus
about.
top down. Can you elaborate a little bit on those concepts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sad thing about top down is that it kind of thinks about it. I mean, we cultures created those top down ideas very much from military, moving big, really difficult things from point A to point B. I think a lot of it in the context of climbing. I'm a climber, and in the old days when you go to scale a peak like Everest, you bring hundreds of porters, dozens of climbers, and you just kind of siege. It was a siege, right? It was the skill was not about the climbing. It was more about the infrastructure, the top-down philosophy of getting the ropes on the mountains. And then climbing was pretty easy because you just pull yourself up on a rope. But the newest philosophy is like, kind of light and fast, right? So two guys run in there quickly, have a couple porters drop some stuff off, and just run up the mountains in a couple days and back. And I think you're seeing that same thing that exists in all of these worlds. So that's really the bottom up philosophy, is that a couple guys in a garage somewhere can start a company like Facebook that becomes the dominant force in marketing and communications, right? It's like we all have the tools to do great things. It doesn't mean that we have to have this kind of printing press somewhere or special proprietary knowledge to do something big. So, and for me, that there's, when you ask about the kind of co-creation versus open stuff, I think they're all kind of flavors on different things, right? It's like crowd is awesome, but when we first started VNS, it was great to get 1,400 ideas to solve a problem, but the client doesn't want 1,400 ideas. He wants 3 good ideas, So it's about how do you curate that stuff, and then co-creation, I think, is taking it one step further. That it's actually taking the client, interacting and letting them interact with the consumer or whoever, or the idea generator, to come up with ideas together. I think co-creation is kind of at a higher level because it can promote the idea internally, that the folks internally are the idea generators, and take pride in that idea, take pride in that process. So.
Well, that's great. Well, John, we know that you've actually wrote several great books. And if I were to tell the community, hey, check out one of John's books, which one would that be? Which one do you think they'd find the most interesting?
Well, I mean, Flipped was kind of essentially Flipped was just a rewrite of Beyond the Brand, and I essentially took Flipped, put it up on a wiki way early. I mean, it's 2007 or 2008 that I did that, and essentially let the wiki rewrite the book to be more modern 5 days later. So I think that's a good book. I'm still totally intrigued by the idea, and I think, Clint, you asked a great question of this idea of how do we get new systems to scale, and then we talked about bureaucracy. I wrote a book called Baked In, and the idea was, the subtitle was creating businesses and products that market themselves. I think in a lot of areas, right, like in the marketing world, there's the marketing world and there's a product design world, and it feels to me like there should be an overarching strategy that feeds both. In many cases, though, it's like there's the strategy and the ideas that come out of the marketing world, and there's the strategy and ideas that come out of the product innovation world, and they really don't communicate. Whereas to me, it's like it's all the same, right? The way your app looks, the way your app feels, if it's your product, is just as important as the way message you talk about in media. So merging of those things. So both of those books I would recommend.
Hey, John, so quick follow-on question here. Obviously you've got tons of incredible experience with brands and agencies and likely sitting in boardrooms making big-time decisions. Can you give us an example of a brand that really did a fantastic job of like marrying what is brand marketing and shepherding that into product marketing and doing it like so well and so elegantly?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, I think people that don't have agencies are way ahead, right? So, and I also think that people that are run by entrepreneurs are way ahead. So when you look at brands, like Patagonia, it's really born out of the product because they're a bunch of dirtbag users. I mean, I would say, what influenced me really early, right, on the whole crowdsourcing thing was that I was on the board of directors of Black Diamond Equipment, which is a climbing equipment company. And we were there at the very beginning, and we were just a bunch of dirtbag climbers. So you would like go and, you build a bunch of, safety gear during the week, and then you'd go out and break it all during the weekend, and you'd give it away to your buddies, and they would say, oh, this is a piece of shit, or this is awesome. And you come back and you try to redo it. So to me, that's the real beauty of co-creation. It's this kind of community-oriented idea that was way beyond, way before this internet, the whole digital world even existed. So, so for me, the people that do it best are still ones that are very community-based, that realize that it's not an us versus them thing, that they're really intrinsically involved in a community. So obviously folks like Patagonia and Nike and North Face and some of the outdoor brands are really, to me, still some of the leaders. For me, probably the most interesting thing, we put co-creation at the center of the strategy of Crispin and became the agency of the decade, winning 18 pitches in a row, and had a lot of influence on a lot of the things that Best Buy did with Geek Squad and Microsoft did with I'm a PC and a bunch of other really, really intriguing work. The example that I think all of us like to look at is kind of what happened with Domino's, right? It's like we had a product that was substandard that everybody made a joke about, and they kept trying to market this bad product. It wasn't until we kind of said, our pizza sucks, that we started getting a lot of momentum. And like, hey, our pizza sucks, come help us make a better pizza. That was the marketing, right? When we started doing that, then it was all about, hey, help us make a better pizza, and then how do we deliver it to you faster, right? So a lot of it, because essentially what transpired at Domino's is that they had a campaign called 30 Minutes or Less. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was this kind of 30-minute guarantee. And, it was great because you kind of knew when your pizza had kind of delivered on your promise of, I'm really hungry, and I want a pizza and it's guaranteed in 30 minutes. The problem is that there was a lawsuit because a driver hit somebody going too fast, and so they couldn't say that anymore, and they were kind of lost. So when they came to Crispin, our point of view was, hey, you need to flip that upside down. Instead of 30-minute guaranteed, it's really you've got 30 minutes. So if you've got 30 minutes, what can you do? And so we created a digital asset of kind of, it was essentially before, way before Uber or anything, but it kind of showed you where the pizza was in the process of being built and when it was going to be delivered to your door, and gave you this kind of signaling device. So it kind of came through on that promise of guaranteeing 30 minutes and then launching into how do we make the product better with your help. I mean, I think that's still one of the great case studies out there because it really changed the trajectory of Domino's as a business. It wasn't just that their marketing was great, it was actually that their business totally grew, and they integrated people more deeply into the business by listening to the crowd.
Hey, John, so how long was the Domino's work now? Because I want to bring something up for our millions of listeners.
I think it was like 2008 when we started on it, and it really launched in, really got serious in 2009, and then it's been rolling for a long time now, but it's incredible success. I mean, Domino's was seen as kind of way behind all the other pizza guys, and now it's kind of seen as the as the leader. And I read something recently. It was like now they're kind of seen more as a tech company than a pizza company, which is really cool.
So for the listeners out there, in about mid 2009, 2008 range, Domino's stock price was about $7 a share. And right now, as we're recording this, it's $189.44.
Wow.
Yeah, it makes a difference, right? It's the beauty of involving your customers in co-creation in open ways into your brand.
For anyone out there who may not be drinking the Kool-Aid or the 2-liter Coke or whatever it is you're drinking to wash down this delicious Domino's, this is real economics talk here, folks.
I think that's so great, Clinton. One of the things I love lately is that, I don't know if you've seen some of the latest ads, but they're asking for ideas from their customers, and they're saying in the ads, they're saying either we'll give you money or we're actually going to give you stock in the company, which is amazing, right? It's so cool. So cool. So.
I was actually going to go off on that and ask you, do you find that the rewards when you do crowdsourcing, is it better to be monetary or are other types of prizes just as appealing in your findings?
Well, I think it depends on the community, right? Like I think if you have a bunch of if you're like a ski company and you're going to co-create designs with them. With your customers, a pair of skis is like the ultimate gift, right? The ultimate win. It's like, hey, I'm Joe Smith and I created those skis, right? That's like the biggest bragging, right? Way more than the money is.
All right. Well,
so
I think
it's a couple things. One
we
is
should probably wrap it up with one last question. So I wanted to go on the exact opposite side of things from the Domino's part of the equation. Well. So. John, I know you've shared a lot of thoughts in the past about fitness while traveling. I'm sure a lot of our listeners might be traveling for work while they're listening to this. Any tips you want to impart on everyone to maybe work off some of that Domino's?
Yeah. Oh, I know, right? It's like something I've been passionate about for a long time. I mean, first of all, it's like just intent, right? And I find it super interesting, especially a lot of stuff that had been written in the New York Times is like, 4 minutes of exercise is some, if it's intense, is as good as 30 minutes. And I think, there's so many excuses, right? There's so many things that just create inertia for us that just like, once you're on a path, it's just hard to do. So, even if it's like have a walking meeting or do something quick like run a couple wind sprints down the block or do a few push-ups, that's great. It's just more of that. One of the things that I'm super interested in, and I think all of us are, is because I feel like we're in this huge transition culturally right now. Whereas I think that the reason Trump even exists is the fact that we've had so much progression with the launch of all the stuff we're talking about. This kind of digitization of the world, that Trump represents kind of the last gasp of a generation longing for a past paradigm, right? And if you look back in history, this happens every time there's rapid acceleration. But with that, it comes like every day you open up, your news feed and you're like, what? That can't be possible. Like that's ruining our culture. And so there's that extra stress. So I'm really attuned to the fact that, hey man, just like get 10 minutes of meditation through Calm or Headspace, or take a moment for yourself and do something kind of out of the obsessive place that we all live in.
That's a great place to wrap up. So you mentioned social media, John. Where can our listeners find you on social media?
Fitness has become way bigger than just physical fitness. It's more kind of spiritual and emotional as well. I'm all over, LinkedIn. I've been writing a bunch of stuff for LinkedIn, and obviously,
All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, John. And
Harvard Business
hopefully
Review,
we can
but
talk
everything
again
kind of
soon.
goes through and connects through LinkedIn, and then obviously Twitter as well, at JT Winsor. Thanks so much. I look forward to it.
We hope you enjoyed this interview with John Winsor. To check out what John is doing at Speakeasy, check out their website at speakeasyguild.com. As always, we welcome your feedback. Please leave reviews and comments on your favorite podcast service or contact us directly at podcast@topcoder.com. If you're interested in crowdsourcing with Topcoder, please check out podcast.topcoder.com. But even if you don't want to or can't crowdsource with us, we encourage you to check out the multitude of crowdsourcing providers in the marketplace. Just get out there and do it. Since our interview with John ran longer than anticipated, we will skip the cool crowd thing this week, but we'll be back with more later. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Loud About Crowdsourcing. We'll see you next episode. Next episode. Next episode. Next episode. Next episode.